Hi, this is David Unsworth, English editor of the Pan Am Post. Today we'll be speaking with author and investor Helen Raleigh. Helen is the head of Red Meadow Advisors, a Colorado investment firm, and is an immigration policy expert at the Centennial Institute. She's written a book entitled The Broken Welcome Mat, which addresses the problems with the American immigration system. We're here today in Las Vegas at Freedom Fest, which is the world's largest gathering of libertarian and free market proponents. Helen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Not bad.
So, one of the things you've talked a lot about in this book is that our immigration system really should be a meritocracy. It should be based on merit. It shouldn't be based on kind of these arbitrary constructs. And what is really important is that we bring in the immigrants that are people that are going to invest in the country and are going to
be successful,
be good American citizens. Mm-hmm. So what can Trump do to make our immigration system a true meritocracy?
Well, Trump's immigration policy is very interesting. And I learned from last year's experience that you really have to separate his policy versus his rhetoric, especially a lot of his tweets.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because he's his own worst enemy. He tends to undermine his own policy. But if you go back to his Arizona speech back in where he was campaigning, to me that was one of the best immigration policy speech. He gave like a 10-point outline. Actually, I can agree with at least half of his policy. He's the first major candidate actually put the meritocracy out there. No other candidate or president ever even uttered the word we should have a merit-based immigration policy. Since his election, you saw more and more publication from think tank, like from my books. You know, a lot more people start talking about we should learn from Canada, we should learn from Australia to have a merit-based immigration policy. The reason I believe we need that because our current immigration system is broken. It was largely we're living the legacy of 1965 Immigration Act, which cemented
the last big immigration reform.
Which we live in a legacy. Yeah, we live in a legacy which is largely designate majority of our annual green card, legal immigrants to family reunion. To me, that has multiple problems. If we want to go through that, have multiple problems with family reunion focused immigration.
Now, one of the things you have discussed recently is that is it the HB5 visa, the visa that with a $500,000 investment in real estate you can...
EB5.
EB5, that's it.
Yes.
Now, what are the perils of basing our immigration policy on something like that? You mentioned that, for example, Jared Kushner's family has been promoting this as a way to... particularly in New York and New Jersey, as a way for, say, Chinese immigrants to get a fast track to a green card. What is your take on the EB5?
So EB5 falls under the employment-based immigration, which is the second largest category we give our green cards to. To me, the concept was a good idea. We want to bring people who can bring jobs and create a business here. That's how that whole visa was created based on an idea. But over the years, there was a loophole because the immigrant was supposed to establish a business or hire people in highly unemployment area with high unemployment rate.
Sure.
But later on, the New York real estate tycoons found a loophole because
lobby, if you will,
in the center of Manhattan, because it's all rich people, nobody works, so it's considered a high unemployment area. So
that's hilarious.
Exactly,
yeah.
Right? And then they sabotage this program because they can use this to sell green cards to investors and get cheap fundings for their high-rise project, which is really opposite for what this program meant for.
Sure.
But I think this program is still a good program. We can reform, and in my book I offered several ideas that we can make this program better, actually bring wealth and create jobs for Americans here in the United States.
Now, corporate executives in the United States often talk about how difficult and time-consuming and expensive it is to get top-level tech talent in specialized fields where Americans, frankly, have not For example, we're very, very deficient in computer science graduates, and we need a lot of computer science graduates from places like China and India and Israel. And what can we do to reform, say, the HB1 visa program? Or how can we make it easier for American companies to bring in the technological talent that we need?
That's a great question. So in my book, I think a free market solution is, because right now the H-1B is strictly quota driven, right? The quota was not based on market demand. There was no rhyme or reason why we only allow 85,000 visas. It was all the quotas were created purely on political basis.
Completely arbitrary.
Completely arbitrary. It does not reflect the market demand, and there's no flexibility because during the 2008, during the economic crisis, there's not enough people to apply. But other than that period, there's always more demand than we're willing to supply. So in my book, I basically say, you know what? Let's, instead of giving a quota, why don't we let the market to tell Congress, to tell the federal government how many we need, in this particular area. We do need to address also the global outsourcing company are the ones who dominated the H-1B visas. That's creating some problems too. So we do need to address that to make this process simpler, easier to apply, and really focus on the areas that meet American needs, the economic needs. And I was an H-1B visa holder. I can tell you, it was not an easy process for the companies. Many criticism of focus on H-1B. They do not realize employers take a great deal of risk to hire somebody like me, right? Because you have to go through legal process, you make it a decline, and your visa has a limited time. And every time we travel, we may not be able to come back. So
it's expensive.
It's expensive,
and time consuming.
Exactly. There's a huge business risk for the employer. So we need to address those things.
Which is why a candidate like Donald Trump comes along and can use immigration as kind of a wedge issue to point out that we do have a serious problem with illegal immigration. We shouldn't, I think, although kind of the libertarian conservative movement are kind of divided on the issue, I think we can all agree that we shouldn't be providing incentives for people to come here illegally. We should make it easier for the right kind of immigrants, the people that we really want in this country, to get residency and to one day get citizenship. What do you think Donald Trump, as we discussed at the beginning of the interview, has done a lot of damage with the immigrant community, which is almost tragic because he's an entrepreneur and so many of the immigrants that want to come here are also entrepreneurs. What can Donald Trump do to repair the damage that he's done with the Republican brand with the immigrant community?
Well, probably he should talk less about the building the wall because that's really not helpful. And I do agree with partially I do agree with him that we need to focus on the border securities, national securities. But to me, those objectives can be achieved without the focus on building the wall. I think once he talked about building the wall, it's really half the country turned off by that idea, right? So to me, the way to really address the illegal immigration issue is we have to have two simultaneous steps happen at the same time. One is law enforcement, like you said. We need to cut back the incentives and disincentivize people. Use law enforcement, disincentivize people to cross the border illegally. But at the same time, we have to recognize that most illegal immigrants are economic migrants. When we make it so hard to issue work visas, then we make it so difficult. Then once they come here, they do not want to run the risk to go back. Right. So we have to offer relief and law enforcement at the same time. The relief part is we need to make temporary work visa a much easier, simpler process for the employers and for the economic migrant workers. And historically, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bursero program. When we had the Bursero program from 1942 to 1965, our illegal immigration was down 90%. The Bursero program allowed the United States to bring farm workers from Mexico. It worked beautifully. Over 6.5 million people from Mexico came through that program. Most of them returned back to Mexico. We did not have much problem. So addressing illegal immigration cannot be just law enforcement. Those things need to go together. And in summary, Trump, as the president of the United States, he needs to lay out a vision for us. He's too focused on the tree without describing the forest. We need to see the forest. I think most Americans, people can come into the middle. If we can let them know, yes, we're going to do law enforcement, but we're also going to offer relief. I think most of us can come to the middle.
Now, Trump talked a very, very hard line on immigration policy, but up to this point, really, what he's done in his first 6 months is heavily, heavily prioritized deporting people in the country who have committed crimes.
Right.
Now, as far as deporting people who are here illegally, but they are working, they're studying. He hasn't gone after the beneficiaries of the so-called Dreamers Act thus far.
The DACA ones.
What do you think that the effect of this is going to be in the Latino communities? The Latino community, almost a third of the Latino community voted for Trump, which may have won him the election. It was astounding. No one thought that was going to happen. Right. But what can Trump do to really emphasize that? I think that most Latinos, if you said to them, look, we want anyone who has committed a felony to be out of here the next day, or once their trial is concluded. But you also have the moral hazard problem, which is to say, if people, say in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, know that they can go to the United States and be automatically taken in, that raises a serious kind of moral, philosophical dilemma, because you are encouraging them to take a very dangerous journey, paying human smuggling.
That's what Obama did with the Dream Act.
The big problem with Obama.
Exactly.
So what can we do?
Well, it's going back to what I said earlier, that so from a Trump standpoint, he needs to tweet less and actually offer a vision, because now he's the president. He needs to offer the vision. What's the ideal immigration should look like, to bring us together? He hasn't done that yet. He's focused on the tree. The good thing is, like you said, the first 6 months, his heavy rhetoric, and the deportation was exaggerated by the media. He talked loud about the deportation, and the ICE was, there was a lot of loud talk about it. But the fact, because the loud talk, it's actually, the illegal border crossing dropped over 60% the six months. So that's the effect. He doesn't really have to do that much actual deportation, but just by talking about it, offered a great disincentive to people to say, hey, you have a different sheriff in town, you better not do this, right?
And Jeff Sessions saying publicly, our borders are not open, do not come.
Exactly, that's important. At the same time, again, we need to recognize most of them are economic migrants. So instead of just say, we cannot only play defense, say, we're going to have strength on border, you can't cross. At the same time, like you said, you live in the Central America, the economic desperation over there, right? So at the same time, he needs to say, come up, say, we need to reform our work visa program. So we, bring something like a Bursero program back. So it's easier if you just want to come here to work, earn some money, then go home. We should make it easy for you to do that legally. This way, it will reduce the incentive for employer to hire illegal worker. This will increase incentive for the migrant workers to come here legally. It's create a win-win. Our immigration reform, in the end, needs to be a win-win situation, both for us, our country, as well as for the migrant workers or the immigrants.
Going back to the theme of the border wall, you've discussed recently that in your experience as a Chinese immigrant, border walls do not necessarily work. And they certainly don't work well.
They don't work well, yeah.
Perhaps a border wall on some of our 2,000-mile border with, this is an enormous border stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to San Diego.
Right, and all kinds of different geographic terrain. Some of them just such a hazard, you can't really build anything there. It's a natural deterrent for crossing. And,
if you build a 12-foot border wall, all you need is a 12-foot fence. It's not, or even a few pieces of rope. The wall is not necessarily a solution. It really has to be more a matter of our economic and
policy. right?
our public policies.
Exactly.
By all means.
So if we talk about just building fence, I agree. Like those easy to cross area, yes, we should strengthen our fence. If the fence left, neglected, we should strengthen our fence. We could also use technology like a drone, like all the other technology to monitor other areas. It's not easy to build a fence. But like I said, all those procedures are playing defense. Right? Our offense is to say, you know what? There is a legal way to come here if you just want to work. We're going to reform the work visa program so you can legally come here to work. Another aspect of this is about half the illegal immigrants are people who came here legally. They overstayed their temporary visa.
Right.
Right? So building a wall is not
visas.
going to stop anybody to doing that. And that's half of the illegal immigrants. So again, we need to better track those people who come here, temporarily. We need to hold their sponsors accountable. We need to hold them accountable. And there's so many other things we can do other than building a wall to deter and control the illegal immigration population that we do not talk about.
So, two of Trump's favorite punching bags in the campaign trail were Mexico and China.
Yeah.
And Trump has taken a fairly hard line with some of these communist regimes around the world, especially places like Cuba and Venezuela, here in the Americas. What is your take on Trump's interaction with China and other East Asian countries so far?
Well,
and what can he do to... We realize that China is kind of on a capitalist economic path, but that necessarily hasn't translated into democratic reforms that we'd like to see. What can Trump do to help the promotion of democracy along in China?
Well, Trump is a very transactional person, right? Everything to him, he's not as ideological as some other presidents we had prior. So he's very transactional, and it seems to me he and the Chinese president had a little bit of honeymoon at Mar-a-Lago back, a couple of months back. And he really wanted to enlist the Chinese president to help him to solve the North Korea issue. So I think he was a little bit naive in that regard, and he quickly realized that. A month later, we saw his tweets. He realized China can't help him, to resolve the North Korea issue, or China is not willing to help him. He needs to offer something more, or he needs to be a little bit hard line. And because he's so transactional, he's non-ideological. I noticed he quickly adjusted his stand. So his DOJ, Department of Justice, actually sanctioned a bank in China, Bank of Dandong, who helped money laundering for North Korea, and he named a couple of Chinese who helped North Korea sell weapons to North Korea. So he has taken some hardline stand, and he's the kind of person that he will use the social media to let his idea out there. And so that's really put the Chinese government on a very uneasy path. Just this week, China and America had their economic dialogue, and nothing happened. No, they did not reach a deal. They did not issue anything. So I think China is still trying to figure him out. So for Trump, I think the best thing he can do is, I'd like him to, when he dealing with China, even though he wants to be transactional, I know he wants China's help with North Korea, but he has to realize that China will only respect a strong leader. So he can't just bluff. If he bluffing, he needs to put the actual actions behind it. China, like all the other regimes, will only respect a strong leader. And I also would like him to show a little more strong stance on China's human rights issue. As you know, China's Nobel Prize winner Liu Xiaobo just passed away, and it was very disappointing.
In prison, or in a hospital.
Heavily guarded hospital.
Yeah.
He died as a prisoner. And I was a little disappointed that President Trump did not come with a more stronger statement. And also, prior to Liu's death, they all met at the G20. None of them, including President Trump, said anything or public pressured the Chinese president to release him from the hospital to come to abroad. So to me, that was a little disappointing, because Trump needs to realize, even though he's not ideological, but America was founded on a set of values and principles. He now assumed that office. He needs to stand for those values and principles as well. So I hope we could quickly learn to catch up and still defending that values and principles.
It would have been nice if you'd taken a stronger position on that.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, why don't you just tell us briefly about your two books here, Confucius Never Said It and The Broken Welcome Mat.
Sure. So Confucius Never Said is really an autobiography about my family. 4 generations started from my great-grandfather. He was a landowner, and he lost all his property under communist China during the land reform. So the story started from him. It's really a story about struggles and triumphs. It documents the suffering of my family from my great-grandfather until my father experienced under the communism, numerous movement. And the second half of the book really about my own experience to come to the United States and to seek freedom and to find liberty and freedom in the end. So it's the first half of the book was really sad, and the second half of the book was really triumphs. There was
Uplifting.
a lot of uplifting. Yeah.
It's an emotional roller coaster,
It's
kind of.
emotional roller coaster, but I hope this book is not a whining book. It's not a complaint about look how bad we suffer. It's really my goal is to help share with Americans. This is the part of history we should know, so we can better appreciate the freedom and liberty we have in this country.
Sure.
Yeah. And my second book, The Broken Welcome Map. Because it took me 17 years to become U.S. citizen, I followed all the right legal steps, and that really turned me into an activist. Again, I don't want to just write something to complain about it, but I really want to seeking for solutions. So I spent the last couple of years doing research and seeking for solutions to say how can we make our immigration system better. So this book, I want to write a little encyclopedia to let people know about the history, about the immigration law, but most importantly, what are some of the good ideas out there can help make our immigration system better.
Well, we'd love to have you back again sometime to discuss immigration reform and immigration policy, and it's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank
you
you
so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.